when it seemed as though the biggest thing we had to handle on the occult realm was dealing with the crystal-powered pants. You guys ever come across that? The crystal-powered pants were pants that the New Agers were marketing, and they sew a teeny little crystal at the base of the spine to help awaken the Kundalini force, which rises up through the chakras, which opens up your ultimate chakra, which gives you the experience of being God. I think, personally, I always assumed crystal-powered pants were designed for New Agers with deep-seated problems, but that's another matter. Witchcraft is the fastest-growing religion on school campuses today, people. If you don't know what the occult is, if you think it's irrelevant and something that only wackos and weirdos look at, think again. The daughter of our worship leader in a church that I'm well acquainted with got involved in Satanism and witchcraft, and her worship leader father and mother thought that was okay. The pastor with whom we consulted on this said, oh, that's all right, it's just a fad, she'll outgrow it. As though these forces about which we are speaking are nothing more than bizarre psychological aberrations. People, there is spiritual reality in the realm of the occult. Oprah Winfrey, the Church of Oprah Winfrey, we could do an entire week seminar on what Oprah Winfrey is teaching, finding the God within, ever since she came across Eric Butterworth's material. Marianne Williamson, Course in Miracles, which, by the way, I confirmed personally was being taught on Robert Schuller's Crystal Cathedral. You don't know about the things that are going on because they don't want you to, but you need to pay attention and listen. The Secret, the Shack, which is one of the most blatant pagan promotions of the God within and goddess spirituality. Papa, who's this big African black woman, anybody would love her. But what are they teaching you? What are they promoting? We could talk for hours about it, but I'm not going to. And look, the Bible affirms the reality of this spiritual realm. Jesus had a personal conversation with a being he called Satan. And he wasn't talking about some dude in a red spandex union suit with hooves and that's now very popular around this time in Halloween, which, by the way, for those of you who are getting ready to celebrate Halloween and you think you're taking the Bible seriously, you do understand that Halloween, the Feast of Samhain, is the high holy day among pagans, neo-pagans, druids, Wiccans, witches, not to mention Satanists across the world. This is not a day of cute little fun with Linus sitting in the great pumpkin patch waiting for the arrival of the great pumpkin, right? Pumpkins are good for pies, but if you think the great anyway, don't get me on that one, that's another 3 hours. But look, the Bible affirms and asserts the reality of the occult. Furthermore, I, as well as many others, have seen it personally. Some of you are nodding and you know what I'm talking about. From the time I was a little girl, about 11 and a half, something moved into our home. I was born and raised in Mexico, in Cuernavaca, which is 45 miles south of Mexico City. American parents. My father fell in love with Mexico and moved his wife down there in 1946. Something moved into our home when I was about 11 and a half, and I'm not going to take the time to tell you the story because I've got more important things to tell you about from Scripture than my story. If you're interested, Beautiful Side of Evil documents some of what I went through. But I, suffice it to say, was aware of the existence of another dimension, populated by evil, populated by something fearsome and sinister, that delighted in scaring the daylights out of a little girl through manifestations of visions, grotesque, bizarre, terrifying things that scared the daylights out of any number of housekeepers. We lost a bunch of them over the years. They wouldn't stay in the house because something gives fright here, and they left. When I graduated from college, I went through the college years seeing bizarre things, developing occult abilities. I could look at somebody intently and know exactly what they were thinking, which, may I hasten to add, was rarely what they were saying. I began to realize I knew what was going to happen. I began to commune with the beings on the side of my bed, even though I was terrified of them. And I realized also, in addition to it, I had no control over it. It wasn't until I graduated from Wesleyan College, my first 2 years, and then I left Chapel Hill, North Carolina, with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Theater, in spite of the fact I never could act my way out of a paper sack, but that's another sorry saga. Was the one thing I could major in without having to take science and math. What can I tell you? So I went back to Mexico. Yeah, some of you relate. In fact, most of our school system relates, which is why we are now one of the most functionally illiterate school systems in the entire globe. And we're having to import mathematicians and scientists. I should feel guilty about that, but I don't. But when I got back to Mexico, wondering what on earth I was going to do with myself, surrounded by beings and forces I had no control over, one night my father was reading through the paper and he said, "Hey, Joe, here's something you might be interested in." And he read to me an ad for Silva Mind Control. Now, mind control, that term has gone out of fashion. They are now the Silva method. And they're in about, 129 countries, all over the place, well known and very popular. Some of you here came up to me already and told me you'd been involved in that. And it's one of many New Age groups, kind of a descendant of Eastern mysticism, that advocates finding, you're going to hear this term a lot, their inner God, the genius potential within. Esalen down the road, Carol and I, as we were driving up, just sort of, "Oh, Esalen, my, this is interesting. Can we come take a tour?" No, and they booted us out and made sure somebody escorted us off. They nobody drive in there. I'd like to think they recognized us, but I doubt they knew who either of us was. Anyway, someday perhaps they will. But it was one of many groups advocating finding your inner God, your genius, latent ability. And in about a 48-hour course, using first-level induction techniques from hypnotism, a metronome, teaching you the techniques of Anton Mesmer, techniques that are very popular among some of the big stage prophets and healers and wonder workers today, men who have carefully studied the techniques of Anton Mesmer and other hypnotists to control the audience and bring about a lot of psychosomatic healing. Interestingly enough, these people now were teaching us how to control the alpha brainwave frequency at will. And we went through a course in which we learned techniques of guided imagery visualization, identical people to the ones I learned at John Wimber's church. We were there at the beginning when he first started with Ken Gullickson, the first vineyards. The exact same techniques that John Wimber's church was promoting of guided imagery visualization, promoted by Agnes Sanford, promoted, by Richard Foster, because Agnes Sanford was a good mentor of Richard Foster's. You all know at Celebration of Discipline. Dallas Willard, whose materials are popular in virtually every seminar in this country, with few exceptions. Using those techniques, we were taught how to project our imagination so that we could read information about people anywhere in the world. The theory being that if you can pick up information about someone, you can send healing vibrations and rays to them. But the most important thing they did for us, besides teaching us how to be a conscious, wide-awake Edgar Cayce, he used to be known as the sleeping prophet, major misnomer. The guy wasn't asleep and he wasn't a prophet. He was a full trance medium who would go into an altered state and these voices would speak through him. A man, by the way, who was a genuine, sincere Christian, he thought. Read the Bible once a year for 43 years, something along that line. Said if ever the devil was going to pull a trick on me and deceive me, this would be it. But then he proceeded to give himself to the work because it felt so right. The fruit seemed so good. And using those same techniques, we were introduced to our wise persons, our counselors. Today they call them spirit guides. They are being introduced to your school children in any number of school systems, thanks to Jack Canfield. You all are aware of the chicken soup for everything from nuts to pets. Chicken soup for the soul, chicken soup for the Christian soul, chicken soup for anybody and everybody. That same Jack Canfield, I've been tracking that turkey since 1978, where he was busy putting out very openly then, and I document that in Like Lambs to the Slaughter, Your Child in the Occult, which is also on the back, promoting the techniques that they were using to introduce school children to their personal guides. And through them, I thought, well, what better guide can I have than Jesus? You see, I was an actual believer at the time. I believed in Jesus. I loved him with all my heart. Somebody had shared the 4 spiritual laws with me my freshman year in college. And I carried around my Bible, I prayed, I called out to this Jesus in terror, praying, desperately seeking for some relief from the forces that buffeted me at will. But now I was being told by Silva Method that I could have this Jesus. After all, didn't Jesus say, if you invite me in, if you knock at the door, and I will come in and sup with you. And I thought, I will invite Jesus. And so this Jesus came into this beautiful place, what Beth Moore and what Richard Foster and what Morton Kelsey and Henry Nouwen and the other contemplatives call moving into silence. And in this place of silence, created by going into an altered state of consciousness, I saw my Jesus coming down into this beautiful laboratory, this psychic laboratory, this place of silence that I had created. And it was the most ecstatic, glorious experience. I know, and my heart breaks and goes out to these men and women in the third wave movement, in the Latter-day Rain and the Manifest Sons of God movement, the Todd Bentleys and the Bob Jones and the Paul Caines and the Patricia Kings, who talk about having these ecstatic experiences. Jesus came to me in my trailer before I move out, says the be-tattooed, poor, tragic Todd Bentley, whose life has been destroyed by the beings he trafficked with, thinking it was Jesus and Emma, Ms. Moneybags angels, sprinkling gold dust up and down the aisles during these manifestations that have nothing to do with biblical manifestations or the presence of the Spirit of God. These are things that Carol and I and many others have been documenting, or worse, living through in the realm of the occult. And yet Christians, like the world today, are looking for experience. That is the operative word. Spirituality in America, Newsweek, September 2005. The whole article there is talking about how from the Christians and the Roman Catholics and the evangelicals and the Buddhists and the Sufis, the esoteric branch of the Muslims, and the Buddhists along with the Hindus, and the pagans, don't leave them out, in the neo-pagans. The only group they left out were the Satanists, but I'm sure they're in there too, looking for an experience, and people, they don't much care where they get it. Interestingly enough, I began to notice that my experience was being colored, and my belief in Jesus and who he is was being colored by that experience. I became involved with yoga. I know some of you here have already been tackling Carol about how dare you say there is no such thing as Christian yoga. After all, Zondervan puts out books on it. The Pastors' Conference, we could take literally, I promise you I won't, Dr. Stan, but we could take a good 4 or 5 hours going through my documentation here, and this is just a tiny taste of what I usually haul around to my portable ammunition dump, of quotes from these people, how they talk about, hey, it's the intent that sanctifies the practice. Tilden Edwards, head of the Shalem Institute in Washington, one of the key contemplative training centers in the world, who says, hey, take any technique you want, be it from the Buddhists, or be it from the Muslims, or be it from the Sufis, or be it from the pagans. If your intent is to worship Jesus, you can do yoga, you can do anything you want, and God will be honored by it because you are Christianizing it. Oh, really? Somebody forgot to tell the living God. Deuteronomy 12. Make a note of it if you'd like, because God, and we're going to talk about some of these other passages, the living God said in Deuteronomy chapter 12, beware that you are not ensnared to follow after them. He was speaking to the children of Israel as they were moving into the promised land. And I'm going to read you from Deuteronomy 18 in a moment to tell you what else God has to think about the world of the occult. But here in Deuteronomy 12, he tells them, beware you are not ensnared to follow after them after they are destroyed before you. You ever wonder why God wiped out the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites and all the other ites that were running, Canaanites that were running around in the land of Canaan, the promised land? It's because they were involved in this kind of spiritual activity. The contemplative techniques, Christianized by the term contemplative, but were the same meditation techniques